Scandal built the Hollywood sign, but not even the tabloids dared touch this secret. Behind the glitz, some of Golden Age Hollywood's most famous men did whatever it took to survive, including selling far more than a screen test. Think you know the darkest corners of Tinseltown? Think again. What if the matinee idol your grandmother adored once hustled his way down Sunset just to keep the lights on? Are you ready to have your illusions shattered? Because number 4 on this list will change how you see old Hollywood forever. Rock Hudson. Let's start with the shocker. Rock Hudson, Hollywood's granite-jawed dreamboat, the definition of American masculinity. Long before he was America's heartthrob, Rock Hudson was just Roy Fitzgerald, a broke truck driver in Illinois who made his way to Los Angeles with nothing but ambition and a pretty face. But ambition doesn't pay the rent, according to several biographers and more than a few whispers from Tinseltown insiders. Hudson's first gigs weren't just bit parts in studio lots. He worked the circuit of exclusive parties, private gatherings where young, desperate actors offered companionship to Hollywood's rich and powerful in exchange for opportunities or a roof over their heads. Hudson's rise wasn't an accident. He fell under the wing of notorious agent Henry Wilson, who specialized in discovering fresh-faced men straight off the bus. Hudson was groomed for stardom, but the unspoken rule in Wilson's world was that nothing came free. The lines between hustling and networking blurred, and Hudson played the game. This side of his story rarely makes the fan magazines, but in the shadowy economy of 1950s, Hollywood, survival meant bending the rules, and sometimes your dignity. Rock Hudson's legacy is more than just a leading man. He was living proof that the Hollywood dream was often built on desperate deals and secret trades. The real story? It's far grittier and far more fascinating than the studios ever admitted. Scotty Bowers. Now let's talk about the man who built a business on Hollywood's best-kept secrets. Scotty Bowers. Scotty wasn't just a hustler, he was the entire phone book. Starting out as a gas station attendant on Hollywood Boulevard in the late 1940s, Bowers quickly became the go-to fixer for the town's most desperate and discreet needs. His full-service memoir dropped bombshells that rewrote everything we thought we knew about Golden Age stars. Actors, producers, even studio heads, Scotty matched them with the company they craved for the right price. Bowers wasn't just working the scene, he was the scene. Dozens of hopeful young men, many aspiring actors, passed through his little empire, hoping one well-paying evening could cover their rent or buy a shot at the big time. Names? Scotty named them all, from matinee idols to serious actors who wore tuxedos by day and hustled for survival by night. And if you think he's just spinning tales, consider this. Plenty of Hollywood memoirs and biographies, even the ones that avoid direct scandal, corroborate his wildest claims. Bowers changed the face of Hollywood's hidden history. He didn't just survive the shadows, he illuminated them. Scotty's world was a world where desperate men turned necessity into an industry, and behind every famous smile, you had to wonder, who paid the price for their dream? Ramon Navaro. The story of Ramon Navaro is a true Hollywood tragedy. Born Jose Ramon Gil Samaniego, this silent film icon shot to fame as the brooding, mysterious Latin lover. But long before the stardom and velvet tuxedos, Navaro's early years in Hollywood were all about survival. He was young, beautiful, and desperately poor in a city that chewed up dreams for breakfast. Rumor, and more than a few credible biographies, suggests Navaro did what many young, hopeful men did in the era. He took private gigs to keep afloat. Navaro's world was an underground of shadowy deals, late-night phone calls, and secret sponsors. For the right sum, he provided company to Hollywood's elite, men who could make or break a career with a single word. These were not the gigs you put on a resume, but in the brutal economics of early Hollywood, they were the only ones that paid. Later in life, Navaro would become a cautionary tale. His tragic murder at the hands of two young men he met under the most unfortunate circumstances exposed the risks and reality of the double life so many lived. What does Navaro's story teach us? That glamour often has a price, And sometimes the biggest stars are the ones who had to pay the most to get there. The silver screen never looked so cold. George Nader. George Nader's journey from struggling unknown to leading man was paved with more than just auditions. Friends with Rock Hudson and part of the infamous Henry Wilson stable, Nader's early days were marked by the same mix of hope, desperation, and behind-closed-doors transactions that defined much of post-war Hollywood's underbelly. Gossip swirled for years that Nader, before he caught his break, worked the same party scene as Hudson, attending exclusive events where good looks could be bartered for access, opportunity, or just enough cash to make it through the week. Nader was more than just another pretty face. He was a survivor in a system that demanded as much off-screen as it did on. Hollywood's power brokers made the rules, and young men like Nader paid the toll. Some historians argue that Nader's career only took off after a series of fortunate introductions at these notorious gatherings. He played the game, and for a while the game rewarded him. Nader's later life was haunted by secrets. He became Rock Hudson's confidant, and some even say his lover, always balancing on the razor's edge between Hollywood's expectations and his own survival. Nader's story is a lesson in the real currency of old Hollywood, where ambition, desperation, and the right connections meant everything, and nobody came out clean. Sal Mano. Sal Mano's face was on every teenage bedroom wall in America, but his path to stardom was more desperate than anyone guessed. Before his breakout in Rebel Without a Cause, Mano was another broke kid trying to make it in Los Angeles, a city that could eat you alive before breakfast. Biographers and old Hollywood insiders whisper that Sal hustled on the city's hidden circuit, taking private gigs and company calls to pay the bills when the auditions dried up. He was talented, driven, and ready to do whatever it took. Mano's secret double life was part open secret, part tragedy. Even after fame found him, the darkness followed. He couldn't escape the shadow economy he once relied on, and those early experiences haunted him. His murder, shrouded in mystery, only amplified the rumors that had followed him for years. Sal's journey wasn't just about a boy making good, it was about what it cost to survive Hollywood's ugliest realities. Mano's story is a testament to the price of ambition in a city that worshipped youth and beauty, but offered precious little mercy to those who didn't already belong. Sometimes the brightest stars come from the darkest streets, and their stories remind us just how high the cost of survival can be. Montgomery Clift. Montgomery Clift's face was the very definition of brooding intensity, and his raw vulnerability lit up every frame he ever touched. But there's a reason Clift felt so real on screen. His private life was filled with the kind of hardship and hustle that left scars no makeup artist could hide. Before the movie sets and magazine covers, Clift was just another hungry actor in New York and Los Angeles. A world where good looks were currency and desperation was the rule, not the exception. Rumors have circled for decades that Clift, always running from poverty and personal demons, sometimes found himself in situations where his company came with a price tag. According to friends and insiders, there were late-night visits, special arrangements, and deals that no one dared write down. It wasn't about pleasure, it was survival, plain and simple. His reputation for emotional honesty may have made him a superstar, but that same openness meant he wore every hardship, every compromise in his haunted eyes. Hollywood loved to romanticize Clift's suffering, but behind the myth was a young man forced to make impossible choices. He wasn't alone. His story echoes through every backlot and casting couch in town, but few had the courage or the heartbreak to play both sides as convincingly as Clift. If his life proved anything, it's that the golden age was paved with broken promises, and sometimes the only way to stay in the game was to bet everything you had, including yourself. Anthony Perkins. Long before Anthony Perkins was scaring the world as Norman Bates in Psycho, he was just another anonymous hopeful struggling to keep his head above water in the predatory ocean of 1950s Hollywood. Perkins had the classic looks, the shy smile, the nervous charm, the sense that he was always keeping something back. And according to multiple biographers and the always unforgiving Hollywood rumor mill, What he kept back was a period in his life where he hustled to survive. In the days before stardom, Perkins ran in the same circles as other young actors on this list, broke, ambitious, and willing to take on party work or special arrangements for extra cash. The casting couch wasn't just for ingenues. There was a whole underground market for young men desperate enough to barter their dignity for a shot at the screen. Perkins was a survivor, and like so many others, he learned that the right party or the right introduction could change everything overnight. His friendships, romances, and secrets all blurred together, creating a tangled web that he spent his career trying to keep out of the headlines. Even as he became a household name, the rumors about his early days never really died. For Perkins, the real horror wasn't the shower scene in Psycho. It was the price he paid just to get his foot in the door. In old Hollywood, nobody got out unscathed. Tab Hunter. If you looked up all-American heartthrob in a 1950s magazine, you'd find Tab Hunter's grin staring back at you. But that movie poster perfection hit a grind much grittier than the fan clubs ever suspected. Hunter's own memoir is refreshingly honest about what it took to get by in a town built on secrets. Like so many of his peers, Hunter found that sometimes the only thing he had to offer was himself, and the market for that was bustling if you knew the right doors to knock on. Hollywood legend Henry Wilson, who managed Hunter's rise, was infamous for recruiting struggling young men straight off the bus and introducing them to arrangements that blurred every line between professional and personal. Hunter never names names, but his stories make it clear. If you wanted to eat, if you wanted a shot at stardom, sometimes you had to do whatever it took. Private parties, mysterious benefactors, and connections that came with strings attached were all part of the job description. Hunter survived the old system with his dignity mostly intact, but not everyone was so lucky. He made it to the top, but not without carrying the weight of all those secrets, and all those nights wondering if the price he'd paid was worth the fame. In the end, Tab Hunter's story isn't just about a boy who made it big. It's about what happens when a dream town forces you to make deals with the devil just to stay afloat. Tyrone Power. Tyrone Power had the face that could launch 1,000 movie tickets and the charisma to match. But before he was swinging swords and wooing leading ladies, Power was another kid in New York, chasing bit parts and scraping by however he could. Whispers from old studio hands, private memoirs, and the relentless gossip machine all hint at a past that didn't match the studio-approved image. Stories have persisted for decades that Power, like many good-looking young hopefuls, took private meetings with powerful men whose help always came at a cost. For actors like Power, survival in pre-war Hollywood meant working every angle. Sometimes that meant the kind of companionship deals nobody put on paper, but everyone in the know talked about after the cocktails were gone. The lines between ambition, exploitation, and necessity blurred into something almost invisible. By the time Power became a global star, his secrets were buried under layers of charm and carefully constructed studio myths. But the rumors never fully died. In the old Hollywood grapevine, Tyrone Power's legacy is double-edged. The adored star on screen and the hustler who did what he had to do before anyone knew his name. His story reminds us that every tuxedo hides a past, and in Hollywood, the price of entry has always been higher than advertised. William Haynes. William Haynes was old Hollywood's ultimate rebel, a man who refused to play by anyone's rules but his own, even if it cost him everything. Long before he became MGM's top box office draw, Haynes was hustling in New York and Los Angeles, using his charm and wit to survive. Unlike many of his peers, Haynes joked openly with friends about his early days, where the line between survival and hustling was razor thin. Haynes understood the real rules of Hollywood better than most. If you were young, broke, and pretty, there was always someone willing to pay for your company, your time, or your promises. For Haynes, those early arrangements weren't just about desperation. They were about taking control in a system that gave young actors almost no power. When MGM forced him to choose between his career and his love life, Haynes walked away from superstardom and built a new empire as one of the most sought-after interior designers in Hollywood. He's remembered now as a pioneer, a man who owned his truth in a town built on lies. Haynes' story proves that sometimes the boldest hustlers become the biggest legends, not just because they survived Hollywood, but because they dared to rewrite its rules. Van Johnson. Van Johnson, the boy next door of MGM, looked like he'd never even jaywalked, let alone hustled on the streets of Hollywood. But that smile and golden boy charm covered a much harsher reality. Johnson arrived in Hollywood without money or family connections, just a prayer and the hope that talent alone could get him noticed. But in a city where everyone is hungry, sometimes the menu isn't what you'd expect. Hollywood's undercurrent was always about who you knew, and sometimes who you helped along the way. There's no shortage of old-timers and biographers who tell stories about Johnson's early days. Desperate for rent, he joined the hidden party scene, rubbing elbows with studio execs, producers, and wealthy men who always seemed to have an extra envelope of cash for companionship. He wasn't alone. Dozens of young men in that era survived by making deals in smoky back rooms, where favors were currency and fame was always just one introduction away. Johnson's transition from hustling to household name is a classic Hollywood transformation. The studio spun him into an all-American poster boy, but those who knew him before the gloss remember a guy who'd seen the business at its most unforgiving. Behind every soft-focus close-up was the steel of a survivor who learned early that in Hollywood, nobody hands you anything for free. Farley Granger. Farley Granger's on-screen innocence was legendary, those wide eyes, that lost puppy vulnerability. But in the jungle of 1940s and 50s Hollywood, you needed more than good looks to last. Granger was open in later years about his complicated private life. He wrote in his memoir about being kept by a Broadway producer before Hollywood ever called. And even after his breakout roles, he found himself at elite parties where introductions and opportunities came with unspoken conditions. For Granger, hustling wasn't about scandal, it was about survival. Young, beautiful, and broke, he learned to navigate a world where the casting couch didn't care about gender. Connections were everything, and sometimes that meant playing the game on terms you never set. Granger moved between worlds, always keeping his dignity, but never denying how tough it was to stay afloat when the spotlight went dark. The lesson from Granger's story? Hollywood's pretty faces often came with ugly histories, and the innocent were usually just the best at hiding how hard they had to hustle. Carrie Grant. Carrie Grant. Debonair, sophisticated, the ultimate leading man, right? But before the suits, the stardom, and the million-dollar smile, Grant was Archibald Leach, a penniless kid on the run in New York and later Los Angeles. He bounced from cheap rooming houses to vaudeville gigs, and according to several biographers, was no stranger to helpful benefactors who wanted more than just company at the theater. Grant's rise is a blueprint for how young men survived the silent and early talkie era. Private parties, secret arrangements, and mysterious friends with money to burn, Grant navigated all of it, always looking for the next rung on the ladder. Some sources suggest that his most valuable asset wasn't his acting at all, but his willingness to charm, flirt, and, when absolutely necessary, cross a line or two to keep from starving. He later transformed himself into the epitome of Hollywood class, but the shadows of those early days never entirely faded. Grant was proof that reinvention is Hollywood's greatest magic trick. But behind the magic, you'll find the hard, unglamorous work of just trying to survive. John Ireland. John Ireland always played the rough guy, the one with the hard stare and quick fists, but life before the fame was anything but tough guy glamorous. As a young man in New York, Ireland faced the same cold reality as so many other actors. Rent due, no roles, and doors slamming in his face. Old studio hands and Broadway gossips alike have swapped stories for years about Ireland's time as a rent boy. A young man who could be counted on to show up at the right parties, say the right things, and make sure certain powerful men remembered his name. For Ireland, this wasn't about wild nights or parties. It was survival. He hustled not for thrills, but for the next meal, the next month's rent, or a break that always seemed to be just out of reach. Once he hit it big, he never looked back, burying that chapter deep beneath the public persona of the tough-as-nails star. But in every hard stare, in gritty role, you could see a glimmer of the kid who learned early that Hollywood chews up the innocent and spits out only the cunning. Richard Chamberlain. Before he was Dr. Kildare or the smoldering lead in epic romances, Richard Chamberlain was just another young hopeful, hungry for any break in a cutthroat industry. The Chamberlain you saw on TV looked effortless, but in reality, he spent years fighting for any opportunity, no matter how it came. Hollywood's underbelly at the time was all about connections, and Chamberlain's earliest years are dotted with rumors of escort gigs and private gatherings where introductions came with expectation, and sometimes payment. Chamberlain's career was carefully managed by powerful agents who, behind closed doors, orchestrated more than just auditions. He was part of a generation where you did what you had to do. Friends and insiders say he played the same private party game as many others, understanding early that sometimes success in Hollywood wasn't just about talent, but about who you were willing to meet and what you were willing to do when you got there. Even as he became a household name, those secrets never left him. Chamberlain's story is the perfect example of how the prettiest faces on the screen often hid the toughest battles and the most complicated paths. Gavin. John Gavin's path to stardom was the stuff of casting agent daydreams. Tall, handsome, all-American. But behind the glossy studio press photos, Gavin's start in Hollywood was anything but golden. In the post-war years, the competition was brutal and the city was full of sharks. Gavin's name regularly comes up in old-school industry whispers about the private companion circuit. Networks of young actors, managed by agents like Henry Wilson, who would attend exclusive gatherings where deals and introductions happened after hours, with expectations that always went beyond handshakes. For many, these arrangements weren't a choice, but a necessity. Rent was due, groceries had to be bought, and sometimes the only way to get noticed was to accept invitations that nobody discussed in public. Gavin wasn't just a pretty face. He was a survivor who learned early how to play the game, even when the rules changed behind closed doors. His later image as a diplomatic, respectable actor only proved how well he'd learned to adapt. In Hollywood, the people who last are the ones who figure out how to keep their secrets hidden in plain sight. Rudolph Valentino. Rudolph Valentino, the Latin lover who set hearts and the box office on fire, was one of the earliest cautionary tales about the true cost of Tinseltown fame. Fresh off the boat from Italy and utterly penniless, Valentino worked menial jobs in New York and Los Angeles before landing his first roles. But in between, he mixed in circles where introductions to wealthy patrons were more valuable than any agent. Biographers have pieced together stories of Valentino's early years, filled with mysterious benefactors and companionship gigs, meetings that led to money-changing hands, always under a thick cloud of discretion. These were not the glamorous affairs you see in old fan magazines, but gritty, sometimes desperate arrangements. Valentino's stunning looks were both his ticket in and his greatest vulnerability. The rumors swirled for decades, and those studio heads worked overtime to protect his image. The truth is that for many young actors, survival in Hollywood meant paying a price no contract ever listed. Valentino's tragic end left more questions than answers. But one thing is clear. In Hollywood, even legends have skeletons, and the city never stops whispering. Dennis Hopper. Before he was the wild man of Easy Rider or the face of New Hollywood Rebellion, Dennis Hopper was just another fresh-faced driver, hoping the next audition would finally change his luck. But when luck ran out, resourcefulness kicked in. Hopper came up through a world where the unwritten rules were enforced by powerful agents, predatory producers, and endless party circuits. According to insiders, Hopper did his share of after-hours work in the 1950s, attending parties where the right company, offered at the right time, could buy you more than just a drink. It could buy you an introduction, a small part, or simply next month's rent. Hopper's later persona, rebellious, unpredictable, always on the edge, was forged in these early days of struggle. He never admitted anything outright, But those in the know say his survivor's instinct was honed by learning exactly how Hollywood's back channels operated. For Hopper, every favor came with a price, and every opportunity was one step away from falling back into the shadows. He played by Hollywood's real rules, the ones written in whispers and paid in cash. George Maharis. George Maharis looked every bit the clean-cut American TV star, but his private world was tangled with the same hidden networks that made and broke so many dreams in the 1950s and 60s Hollywood. Arrested in what newspapers called compromising situations, Maharis found himself exposed to the public gaze more than once, but the reality was even rougher behind the scenes. Early in his career, Maharis, like so many others, did what it took to survive, accepting party gigs, making deals for introductions, and joining the silent army of young men for whom hustling was the only way to keep hope alive. Maharis's life is a study in duality, the polished TV hero by day, the struggling survivor by night. Even as his fame grew, the old rumors clung to him, proof that in Hollywood, your past is never really past. For Maharis and so many others, the Hollywood dream always came with a hidden price tag, and the receipts were paid in secrecy. Guy Madison. Guy Madison's clean-cut cowboy image was all show. In reality, Madison's early years in Los Angeles were defined by the same hustling, backroom deals, and after-hours arrangements that shaped the careers of many pretty faces in the 1940s and 50s. Hand-picked by Henry Wilson, the master of launching desperate young men, Madison found himself pulled into a world where invitations to exclusive parties often doubled as auditions for opportunities you'd never see in a studio contract. The rumor mill says Madison did company work to cover rent and make connections long before the studio started printing his face on movie posters. Those close to him recall stories of whispered deals and mysterious benefactors, the kind that were never written down but always remembered. Madison's journey is a reminder that for every big break, there's a backstory nobody ever puts on the record. In Hollywood, survival demanded more than talent. It demanded an unflinching willingness to do what it took, even when the lights were off and the cameras weren't rolling. Jack Wrangler. Jack Wrangler was a legend in two worlds, the underground circuit of pre-fame Hollywood and, later, as a bold personality in adult entertainment and theater. But before the spotlights and headlines, Wrangler was just another young man trying to make ends meet in a city built on ambition and illusion. He arrived in Los Angeles armed with little more than charm and confidence, quickly discovering that the quickest way to a paycheck, or a crucial introduction, was through the hidden network of companionship gigs arranged in the shadows. Friends from those early days described Wrangler as fearless, never ashamed to admit he'd done what he had to do to survive. Whether working exclusive parties or making deals with industry insiders, he turned hustling into an art form and eventually built a whole career out of refusing to hide who he was. Wrangler's unapologetic honesty would later become his calling card. He showed that sometimes the only way to beat Hollywood at its own game was to stop pretending, grab the spotlight, and make the world remember your name, on your terms, not theirs. Don Murray. Don Murray is best known for his breakout role in Bus Stop, but before the applause there were the lean years, years filled with uncertainty, bad auditions, and late rent. Like so many others, Murray found himself navigating the unspoken rules of Hollywood's underbelly, accepting favors and company gigs set up by power brokers who expected more than a handshake. The stories about Murray's arrangements circulated among studio insiders, painting a picture of a man who learned early that opportunities came with strings attached. Murray's eventual success was built not just on talent, but on his willingness to survive the roughest stretches of the journey. He never made headlines for scandal, but those who knew the old Hollywood code understood that nobody's path was spotless. Murray's story is a quiet testament to how the most enduring careers often start in places nobody dares to talk about. Troy Donahue. Troy Donahue was the golden boy, the teen idol plastered across bedroom walls and gossip magazines. But the real story behind that perfect hair and wide smile was a brutal scramble for survival. Like many of Henry Wilson's discoveries, Donahue entered Hollywood at a time when studio power brokers wielded enormous control. His first years in the business were marked by a string of late-night parties and special favors, the kind of arrangements whispered about but never written down. Donahue's good looks opened doors, but those doors always came with a price. He later spoke candidly about the desperate measures young actors took just to stay afloat. In Donahue's Hollywood, the hustle was never optional, it was the rule. His rise from broke newcomer to household name was paved by a system that demanded more than talent. He played along because, for most, there was simply no other way out. Brad Dexter. Brad Dexter, forever the seventh man in the Magnificent Seven, had a story that started far from any red carpet. Arriving in Los Angeles with barely a dollar, Dexter's first jobs weren't glamorous, they were about survival. Industry insiders and old friends recalled the arrangements Dexter made: dinners with wealthy backers, late-night parties where the right company could mean a shot at a speaking role. In those years, everything was negotiable: friendship, loyalty, even a shot at fame. Dexter's career never reached superstar heights, but he carved out a steady place in Hollywood. Underneath that tough guy persona, though, was the memory of a time when just staying in the game meant saying yes to deals nobody talked about in daylight. Dexter's story is a reminder. For every legend who made it big, there are dozens more who had to hustle twice as hard just to get a taste of the dream. Salvatore Sal Mano. Sal Mano's rise and fall reads like the ultimate Hollywood cautionary tale. He became a star almost overnight, but before the cameras rolled and the awards came, he was just another desperate face in the crowd. Multiple sources, from industry insiders to urban legends, describe Mano's lean years as a time when every dollar counted, and survival meant making choices nobody wanted to admit. His name circulated on the underground circuit, where favors and introductions traded hands in whispered deals and closed-door gatherings. Even after finding fame, Mano could never fully escape the shadow economy that had helped him get by. The rumors followed him, fed by tragedy and scandal, until his death, one of Hollywood's great mysteries, cemented his reputation as both a star and a survivor of the city's darkest games. Mano's story is a fitting close to this list, a reminder that, in the end, Hollywood's brightest lights always cast the longest shadows. There you have it, 25 legends, 25 secrets buried just beneath the glittering surface. The next time you watch a Golden Age classic, remember, every handsome smile on that screen might have masked a battle just to make it through the door. Hollywood built its empire on ambition, but survival often meant playing by rules nobody wrote down. Which story surprised you most? Drop your thoughts below, subscribe for more wild Hollywood history, and never forget, the juiciest stories are always hiding in plain sight.